So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we are making a return to TOL FALAS. And interestingly enough, actually, I did record a TOL FALAS video somewhat recently which hasn't come out, but that one will be pushed back to basically the end of the current schedule that I've got, which means it'll be a little over a month away, sort of halfway through November when that one comes out actually. Because this one is going to be pushed to the front of the queue, because not only is it a scenario, but it's also a slightly changed version of TOL FALAS. This area of the map is very much the same, however there are certain differences. For a start, there is now a way through from this hill directly into the town, rather than having to go down and around. There's that area over there, of course, as well. An area of the map I didn't really get to see, actually, was this over here, although I don't really think there's much in the way of differences here, other than the fact that there is now a river that cuts through a portion of this area, so it does sort of naturally bisect the attackers at least a little bit. But that's not really relevant to this battle, because obviously we do actually try to hold the extremities of this village over here at least a little bit in this particular scenario. I know that because I was actually in this one. And when this one comes out, that will make it 3 in a row of the battles I've shown in my channel that I'm actually in, so how about that? Miracles do happen. But yeah, that's there. But the main differences I would have to say is this side of the map over here, where there are now several pathways through these mountains over here, which can be used by the attackers to get into this side of the map. So TOL FALAS is one of the maps I've always said could work out in many different ways, but honestly in recent times that hasn't really been true. It has settled into a meta all of its own, really, where every map tends to work out in the same kind of way. Everyone's reached consensus on how best to defend it, and that means that the battles do get rather samey. As the battle I've already recorded it was slightly different, but for the most part it did actually follow the same sort of template as normal. Defenders hold that hill and the choke point over on the far side, and then they try to retreat to sort of this area here. But that's not going to be the case this time, because we have simply more avenues of defence to attend to, and I am going to be on the defensive side. It is also lore friendly, this one, at least to a certain extent, because it is fully good versus evil. Arthedain probably wouldn't make their way down here under normal circumstances in the 3rd Age anyway, but here they are nonetheless. We'll go through the attackers first and foremost, however, starting off with the player who made these additions to TOL FALAS, which is Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud, of course, the main source of scenarios being set up in Reforged these days, it must be said. So his efforts are very much appreciated, and hopefully I can engage in more of these now, because my backlog is kind of empty at this stage. So hopefully I can engage in a few more of these as well, make it a little bit easier for him to find players at any rate, because I know he has a few issues in sort of wrangling people, so it would probably behoove me to make that a little bit easier for him, at least where I can. Might be a little bit more difficult now University has started up. But he's playing as Mordor, the only orcish faction on the field today. Mordor heading up this assault on TOL FALAS. He's got some Uruk captains here, which is actually his general's bodyguard, so a shielded unit of bodyguard infantry. Armour piercing as well. Their swords don't really get that point across, but they are armour piercing, which makes them slightly more useful, I would say, than most other line infantry bodyguards of this type, which is nice for Mordor. Minas Morgul's chosen as well, very nice heavy spears, which in a situation like this, when you're on the attack and you know you're going to come under heavy arrow fire, considering it is a 4v4 scenario and all 4 of our armies are, it behooves us to use our skirmishers more so, because we're not going to win in a straight up just brawl with the 4 factions that are arrayed against us. So it makes sense for Mordor to use these kind of units to mitigate that skirmish damage, because it's probably going to be the most deadly thing, as it often is for attackers as they move forward. More Minas Morgul chosen. I really like this Minas Morgul chosen model, to be honest with you. I think it's a real improvement over the old one, even though the Jack Skellington style sort of emblem on their shields was kind of fun. We've got the Blackguard of Barad-dûr as well, so we're going to try and push through the lines, of course, on some occasions. In addition to that, of course, their massive shield value means that they also can absorb a lot of arrow fire. Ranges are a different matter, of course, but still, the Blackguard will be good at trying to push their way through the choke points. There are a few of them, but most of them on this side of the map anyway are quite narrow. He's got some upgraded Temple Executioners, a really, really deadly unit of heavy swordsmen, which you can use more freely because the general is not in this unit. Also some Orc Javelins again, good for clearing out those pesky choke points which Mordor are going to have to deal with on this occasion. Moran on infantry as well, so just some basic units, of course, which can be used as needed. Not the most killing power, not the most impressive armour, but there are a lot of them, and that's really the key, isn't it, for Mordor? On most occasions anyway. He's got some Moran on halberds. Of course you don't really want them in the view of arrow fire, because they will fall away. I mean, the armour of the Moran on units is not absolutely awful, but it's still not going to be enough to deal with sort of upper end skirmishes, the like of which they'll be facing down this time. It is Mordor's phalanx as well, so the armour piercing is going to be important in that regard, because they're going to need to reinforce their line. Temple Guard as well, so the armour piercing arrows, again, a really nice tool if they can get to the right position and shoot into the defensive position that we are going to be manning. That's going to be really, really useful for them. Sauron's Will, armour piercing is going to be universally useful against all defenders today, so that's going to be nice. And then 2 units actually of Olag Kai as well as the Nazgul, so a really nice sort of spike of damage that he can use if the Olag Kai are committed all at once. And then there's of course the Nazgul, who can slowly go about their business as long as they're embedded in Mordor's main army. Then we have the first of 2 Kandish armies today under the command of Mr. Sneakman. Like I said, armour piercing going to be universally useful against Dole Amroth, Gondor and Arthedain, who are the defenders today. So Kand are actually going to be a very efficient faction on this occasion, and of course they're pretty good at shrugging off a lot of range damage as long as it's from sort of basic arrow fire, because the Nurads have got big shields, the Variags can upgrade their armour and are just reasonably tanky for their price all around. So a good faction to have in this situation, I would say, Kand. It's really what they have over Rohan, the fact that they can be this this really awkward to break down blob of AP infantry. And the Nurad footmen are obviously at the very centre of that. Certainly myself and Lord Kamul, who are playing as Dole Amroth, will really not enjoy going up against the Nurad footmen because they'll be really efficient against us. Dole Amroth's infantry, of course, lacks a little bit. If it were Gondor, they could just use their quality on foot, but for us it's not going to be quite so simple. So how we set up our defence is going to be absolutely vital for us, otherwise Kand will just wear us down over a long period of time. Variag Bowmen going to be central to that as well, with their armour upgrade as well. It makes them a really, really good archer for skirmishing. We do have some slight terrain advantages we can use to sort of get the first shots off, but ultimately, Variag Bowmen, it's really going to be... that attrition fight is what Kand wants, so we're going to have to be really on the lookout for that. 2 units of Storm Guard you can see here, which obviously are really, really deadly, very, very good armour-piercing infantry. And if you commit them to a full assault as well, it can be a real nightmare to get rid of them. We also have some Brotherhood of the Spear. Big shield value, really good as far as spears go. They're not AP, I don't think, but their stats are really, really high, which is at least as far as spears on their tier go. So that is very nice for them as well. Obviously, the big shields very much a factor also. Variag Warriors with the armor upgrade. I mean, in this case, because they lack the shield, the arrows that they're going to be facing will still kill them pretty quickly. But still, it's nice to have those swordsmen on the line because it gives them that defensive skill that the Nurads lack, really. Speaking of which, lots of halberds, so lots more AP. Which is obviously going to be a problem. Nice armor-piercing phalanx that they can utilise. More Brotherhood units as well, so you can see that because it's a 4v4 siege, the attackers have got a ton of quality that they can use. Another unit of Brotherhood of the Spear, 2 units of Brotherhood of the Axe, which are going to be devastating to all the defending armies once again because of how good they are with their AP damage. And a Hwacha, which, considering the wide nature of TOL FALAS' defence, at least on this occasion, the Hwacha should be very, very useful indeed. The second Kandish army is Y2K86. He's got some Brotherhood units as well, Spear and the Axe. He's got a Hwacha. One difference in his army is he does have some Variag Cataphracts, and some mounted units are going to be quite useful on this occasion because it is something that we have a few of as well. So if they can be used defensively first and foremost, it will make it more difficult for us to get some value off with some of our units. He's got some Brotherhood of the Sword, which are pretty good as a sort of unit which stays alive for a long time in melee because of their really high melee defense. Damage-wise, though, they may struggle, and also they are unshielded. The Brotherhood units have got some decent armor values, but they will be one of the targets that we can go after, as well as the Brotherhood of the Axe, which is worth pointing out. That is one way we can try and deal with them. Variag Bowmen, Nurads, again, it's going to be very similar now. Lots of Variag Bowmen to skirmish, and then Nurads all round, really, to deal with the melee oomph that Kand are going to need to get through our defensive position. So yeah, lots of footmen and halberds. He's also got some Javelin boys down here, a couple of nomadic marauders. Obviously they're going to be really weak to arrow fire, but there's so much for us to shoot at with our archers that they may slip under the radar. And of course, again, cheap javelins in much the same way that the orc javelins are, easy to get value with them, especially if they get a few payloads off into our defence. And finally, for the attackers, we have Mevin, who's playing as Umbar, bringing the quality as they often do, and the heavy armour. Arthedain, Shield Guard, very, very tough to wear down. They're not the most damaging unit of spears. They're kind of similar to the Brotherhood of the Spear in terms of the tier that they're on, only the Brotherhood spears tend to do a little bit more damage, I've noticed. I don't know whether that's just nonsense and it's just something that I've observed by chance, But I would suggest that they have higher damage stats, whereas the Arthedain Shield Guard have obviously got that really thick armour, which makes them better at holding, which arguably makes the Arthedain the better unit, because that's what spears have to do at the end of the day. Lots of them, so Umbar really bringing the quality on the front line. That's going to be tough to wear down, whether at melee or in melee or at range. Alcarondas Legion, of course, as far as line infantry goes, is going to be very tough to deal with them also. So yeah, in terms of a straight up just melee brawl, that's not what we want, because they've got everything they need. They've got very nice efficient armour piercing from Khan, they've got numbers from Mordor, they've got quality overall from Umbar. It's going to be tough. We're going to need to deal with this in a different way. Corsair Blackguards, Balaketh Marksman, more Corsair Blackguards. He's also got the very scary Naaru Sentinels. Fantastic unit of pikes there, as well as Balagai Pikemen. So towards the late game, they should have plenty of pikes at their disposal, which is worrying for us. More armour piercing as well. Upgraded Balaketh Axe Guard. And at the back, of course, I'm sure we just noticed them. Harbingers of Castamere. But now for us as the defenders, you can see that we're not actually... I was actually thinking, because this is where the army's deployed, and it was just straight in, no deployment phase, the battle has begun. I was actually going to transition my army over towards to try and hold this city over here, based on what the enemy was doing, but because of where I deployed, ultimately that wasn't going to be possible. So myself and Lord Kamul are the two Dole Amroth armies, and we're going to be defending from the front, really. We can't really move forward and defend this village directly in the way that we saw in the very first TOL FALAS replay. I distinctly remember archers being up here and units in the village. That's not going to be terribly possible, because we'll just be overwhelmed and smashed to pieces too quickly. So Kamul is going to pull back a little bit, and we're going to defend this section of the village instead, with the support of archers up on that high ground over there. He's got some Arthedain marksmen, so I actually don't have these, so he actually does have the skirmish archers, which are a little bit better, which is perhaps for the best, because he's going to be the one which sort of takes the assault first and foremost, really. He's got a unit of Black Swan Renegades as well as several units of Athalon Halberdiers, which I think they're probably slightly better actually than the Nurad Halberdiers. They're just slightly more expensive, but on this occasion, of course, costs don't matter, because they are it's a scenario, so our armies are assigned. The problem is going to be stuff like the pikes, of course, if we don't really want to see them too quickly if we can help it. Some upgraded Athalon men-at-arms as well. It's worth saying that in comparison to Arthedain and Gondor, they only have one level of armour upgrade as opposed to two. So again, it's an example of Dole Amroth's infantry just being slightly lower tier really than or lower quality than Arthedain's, but especially Gondor. We can of course do our damage in other ways. He's got some Doran swordsmen. They're of course going to really struggle at dealing damage to a lot of the higher quality units, but they can at least get in the way and be a good tar pit. Got some Wanderers of Nimrodale, so the Rangers of course going to be vital to our defence over here. Some Tirithea Lancers, so some lower tier Lancers, as well as of course the mighty Haven Knights. So the Variag Cataphracts will want to stay away from them. Actually, the Umbar player have Warlords of Umbar somewhere as well, it's worth saying, so more cavalry on the field. Dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan, which is where one of the Dole Amroth generals is, Kamul's. So they're going to be good for holding the line, a very good supporting unit. Perithil Champions and Doran Pikemen are fully upgraded. Actually, no, not fully upgraded. No, yeah, they are upgraded. So yeah, Pikes, Heavy Swordsmen, supporting line infantry as well, very nice. And then we start to get into my army, so I've just got the 2 units of Athalon men-at-arms as well, once again with the upgrades. It's worth assuming that every unit that can have its armour visually upgraded has had it upgraded for this scenario. I've got 2 units of the Black Swan Renegades, which is quite nice. Nice mace men. Got a couple of, actually I've got 4 units of upgraded Doran archers, so while I don't have the Tirithea marksmen, I do have quite a lot of these sort of rank and file archers, which are going to be good for skirmishing. But ultimately I am going to have to use the ammunition quite wisely. I can't afford to just dump it all into Variag Bowmen, because that's exactly what the enemy will want to happen. I do have a unit of Belfalas Marines as well. A couple of units of Knights of the Silver Swan, one of which actually is where my general is, rather interestingly. So it'll be interesting to see how I can use the Lancers, because I do have a unit of Arthedain as well, which is probably where the general was intended to be, but I actually don't mind this, because it means I can use the Arthedain maybe slightly more aggressively, and they are of course the Knights, so they're more deadly. A couple of units of Doran Pikes going to be vital for holding the line. I have got 2 units of Perithil Champions. There's more archers back here. I also have a unit of the mighty Haven Guard. This is where Dole Amroth's infantry is at its best, of course, when it comes to its heavy swords, and a couple of units of Athalon Halberdiers. Moving over to here, we have Lango, who is going to be defending from the front with Arthedain. He's got some dismounted Knights of Numinas. Wardens of the North, obviously a devastating AP archer. Mordor will have to be on the lookout for that as they move through the mountains. Fornost are ranged defenders, good for holding the line, but still, I mean, they're not going to do much damage. They're sort of your archetypal Western spear, really. They pack on the armour, they're not overly expensive when you bring them, but ultimately, you know, their killing power is very limited. You will need to combine them with something else for it to be effective. Upgraded Arthedain pikes, again, going to be vital for holding Mordor at bay, because they don't really have an answer to that, other than stuff like the Olag High or skirmishing them. The halberds can, of course, be held at arm's length, and with the amount that Arthedain have brought the pikes here, it's not a simple case of just barging through them with the Blackguard either. Some Arthedain marksmen with the upgrade, so obviously they can skirmish quite happily with Mordor. More pikes down here. Got some Arthedain men-at-arms fully upgraded with the Fornost Arraign defenders. So that's very nice. But of course, a lot of the rank and file here in comparison to the very scary armies that the attackers have. Militia as well back here with some upgraded Evendim archers. We also have some Dunedain peacekeepers, so a nice bit of quality. They'll be really good against the Morannon units. And more Fornost Arraign defenders. And I think that's pretty much it. And we'll get on to the final army now, under the command of Viper Action, which is Gondor. Of all of us, Gondor have got the strongest infantry overall, at least as a faction. Fully upgraded Axemen of Lasarnak will be really nice for their armour piercing. Again, going to be universally useful against all the attackers today. We've got some Wardens of the White Tower, which is where the Gondorian general is going to be. Very good defensively. And we have a lot of Gondor infantry with the armour upgrades. Again, not going to be so useful against all of the armour piercing that can bring to bear especially. But by this point in the battle, hopefully, they'll be tanky enough to absorb enough of the pressure, because Gondor, of course, are going to be sort of the thing that's propping everything up. If we need to fall back, Gondor will be ready. Veterans of Osgiliath, 2 of them fully upgraded as well, really, really strong, of course, and I think that's pretty much it. I think there's a few units in behind over here. Is there? Yes, there is. Some marksmen of Caer Andros, a couple of units of them, and I think that's pretty much it. There's Pelargia Marines over here. As well as obviously the Fountain Guard, which are an ever-present really, as well as some guards of Osgiliath. So I'm going to make a little cut here, because obviously there's not really a grace period as such. I mean, technically there is, but it really just worked out to the point where by the time the attackers marched into range, the grace period was over. So I'll make a little cut, and then we'll rejoin when the battle is about to begin. So here we go. You can see that the Temple Guard have gotten into position at the summit of the hill, so Mordor has been able to climb up here quicker than the forces of Arthedain, which is obviously going to be bad for us, because it means we're going to be at a terrain disadvantage, or at least Lango is. So he's going to be moving forward with his dismounted Knights of Illuminus as they get last samurai'd here by the mighty Temple Guard's projectiles. And honestly, once they get into melee, the Temple Guard will be able to hold their own as well, especially with the damage that the dismounted Knights are taking. But I would suggest that Arthedain can't really afford to let Mordor take this summit completely unopposed. You can see there down in the distance as well, the armies of Dole Amroth also getting into position ready to receive the attacks. The Temple Guard are now going to retreat, so they don't want to get mixed up with the Knights of Illuminus. They don't want to take any unnecessary losses. They are getting knocked over by the Olag High. However, I imagine the Sauron's faithful are not going to be too pleased that these dumb trolls have just knocked them to the ground. But Arthedain are actually going to pull back now, so they are actually going to get into a position further down the hill. I suppose charging in unthinkingly is not going to be the play here. They do need to be careful. I mean, Arthedain have taken up good defensive positions elsewhere, but here on the central column, I think this is where Mordor can advance most easily, because they have a very nice terrain advantage that they can utilise. You can see going around the back over here, across the triple bridges, there's sort of neon lights in the distance, which is quite interesting. Rave on the mainland, anyone? Anyway, Mevan's Umbar force, or at least a portion of his Umbar force, is going to be going through the main city of TOL and going around this way. So I was actually planning on sort of defending a little bit more from the front, maybe going down and going over here with at least a portion of my army, but when I saw how quickly Mevan was moving and actually how much quality he was sending, I decided against it in the end, and instead I'm going to defend up here, utilise this plateau here, and then, ironically enough, considering my normal complaints about TOL now, I'm actually occupying the position that is seen most commonly on TOL, but at least this time it's not going to be assaulted in exactly the same way by going this way, because we have a huge amount of strength over here, so it will behoove the attackers to go across these two bridges over here and attack the hill this way, and as well then you've got Mevan's flanking force, which is going to be attacking through that gap as well. So I've spread myself a little bit thin perhaps, because I am going to need to help Carmul defend from the front, otherwise he's going to be taken apart by 2 full Kandish stacks. You can see here as well that the Hwatcher is already bombarding our position. It's already managed to score a few decent hits, grilling a few of the Black Swan Renegades, killing a few of those Athalon Halberdiers as well, actually managing to kill off one of the Rangers, or at least a couple of the Rangers actually, which is bad for us. You can see I've got my Cavalry in behind over here, which I'm just sort of keeping in reserve for now. I still haven't fully made up my mind, to be honest with you. I was going to send my cavalry over there, but seeing the knights move over the warlords, I sent my knights to Silver Swan back because it would be suicide to send a unit of lancers against a unit of knights. Morannon infantry, they have actually pulled back. You see Dunedain peacekeepers on the way forward, axes and round shields in hand. Interesting that Mordor have pulled back a little bit from the summit. Maybe they want to draw Arthedain in just a bit. You can see some Morannon halberds move forward as well, which is worth moving them up actually, because Arthedain can't get skirmishers into a decent position to shoot them, or at least not too easily. So this could be the ideal environment for the Morannon halberds to really shine, backed up by the infantry, and going up against a fully infantry force as well. And if they can efficiently deal with the Dunedain peacekeepers, that'll be a real win for Mordor. Meanwhile, down here on the low ground, you can see just sort of worrying the Kandish lines. Lord Cumall moving in with his Tirithea lancers. Obviously, it's easier said than done, really, to charge into Can from the front, especially when they've got all of these halberdiers. But of course, the great hope is that we can draw in a lot of these unshielded units close enough to our firing lines up on the hill over there to really go to town on them. Not really worth going after the very cataphracts with how brutally tanky they are. It is interesting though, you can see here a bit of skirmishing back and forth already. A few dead halberdiers, Brotherhood of the Spear. It is interesting though, like it would have been maybe a little bit more beneficial if Cumall had pulled his defensive line back just a little bit more, because then that would have allowed all of these archers to come into play slightly sooner. You can see there a conga line of archers trying to reposition themselves. One of these Tirithea Lancers is going to do the lowest tier of cavalry that we have at our disposal today. And that is a conundrum for us as the Dole Amroth players. How best do we go about our business here with our cavalry? It's not going to be easy. I mean, I sort of resolved, I was going to try and use them fairly aggressively, but in the end I resolved that wasn't really going to be possible. So instead I'm going to sort of bide my time and wait, which is risky, because if the enemy move forward in an organised fashion, they can essentially bottle them up and they'll end up being useless, which, considering how much power is bound up in those 3 cavalry units, would be a real loss for us as the defenders. But we'll see. It's better than just charging them in banzai style into the front of a bunch of Nurads. And Lord Cumall is also doing a good thing here, just making sure that they can't sort of get set easily with their archers. But really, the only genuine engagements that have happened so far have been up here on this hill with Arthedain. You can see that Mordor, staring contest here for the time being, but Mordor is just biding their time and waiting. It is interesting that Mordor have been left to their own devices here. It's sort of one-on-one against Arthedain. But having said that, they should win that, Mordor, because individually they have better quality than Arthedain. If Arthedain aren't able to get their skirmishes into place, which in many places in these hills is quite difficult, you back Mordor in that particular engagement. Meanwhile, Kand are moving forward, taking the front foot. You can see that they have been skirmishing pretty effectively actually against those Tirithea marksmen. A lot of volume coming forth from the Kandish archer lines. There are the very at the moment, taking up a nice position here on the superior ground. Not many of them have fallen either, so a good start to proceedings for Kand. And they won't mind too much when they survey this line here and see what they're facing off against. Indeed, the Nurad halberds are going to get in there first. Move in, phalanx down, Brotherhood of the Spear backing them up. And the backup of the 2 halberd units here is going to be the key difference, because those Dole Amroth swordsmen are going to get absolutely ripped to shreds. But there are immediate reinforcements, another unit of Dole Amroth swordsmen. And as long as we have the ability to shoot into this position, which we do at this point, then that should be just fine. It will allow us to get some nice efficiency as the Brotherhood of the Spear close in as well. We also have this over here, I think actually, yes, he's handling that with his Tirithea marksman going after the Nurad halberds. I was holding fire for the moment. Obviously rationing your skirmish ammunition is very important. Nurad footmen are going to try and get around the flank, which they are going to be able to here from Mr. Sweetman, so Lord Cumall is going to have to send a unit of infantry across to stop them from doing this. Not the easiest task, of course, because that AP that the Nurads traffic in is going to be a really, really useful feature for them. Dole Amroth's infantry, of course, we lack a little bit next to our allies on this occasion. So you can see over here, setting up a position myself as some infantry starts to come across here. The very cataphracts from Y2K moving forward. So this is going to be a sort of back and forth that we have, because essentially what I need to do at this point, when the cavalry comes forward, I need the pikes to be the ones sticking out in front. When the archers start opening up, I need the Black Swan renegades to get in front with their shields and their armour. So it's a bit of a dance that we have going on there. I'm also opening up with one of my units of Dole Amroth. I have enough of them to the point where I actually feel comfortable skirmishing with them for the time being, not allowing them to get fully comfortable. But yeah, for now, the full engagement has not yet occurred. You can see I actually moved my pikes back just a little bit too far, but I can say that, at least for the moment, the cavalry is just kept at arm's length. It keeps charging in and then charging back out again, and that's the pattern that it falls into, at least temporarily. Variag warriors moving in, and that is a sign that I actually start opening up with my Dole Amroth archers as well. Armour upgrade or no, they're still going to be one of the more vulnerable elements of the Kandish horde. And you can see over here as well that the Arthedain lancers charging in from the side, reinforcements from a quality unit from Lord Carnal as well. Those Black Swan Renegades' presence on the front line will be really nice. Individually, of course, they are stronger than the Nurads. But the problem here is going to be the sheer amount of Kandish units on the front line. Also, with Storm Guard on the way, that is obviously a really genuine concern that Dole Amroth are going to have here. Arthedain Lancers are going to charge in. I mean, the Nurad Storm Guard are not set, to be fair, so that charge should at least kill off a couple of them. Although they are multiple HP, so they could be able to mitigate that charge. And they do actually fully. That second hit point is what saved them there. Otherwise, a couple of them probably would have fallen. Meanwhile, we're also seeing the beginnings of the battle in the hills over here near the cliffs to the lake. The Olag High massacring the Fornosterine defenders. A good choice. Obviously, you need high damage to go up against Olag High. They count as infantry after all. So those spearmen are not going to be the answer, especially not with Sauron's will as well. It's going to be like taking a tin opener to a tin, really. And the Fornosterine defenders are going to melt away very, very fast, so a nice pick there from Eclipse. So he's had the better end of the engagements thus far. There are engagements happening up here as well, though. Orc Javelins getting engaged a little bit by the Axemen of the Sarnak from Viper action. I think they should probably carry on, shouldn't they? Otherwise those Orc Javelins are going to be free to fire their javelins as they so please. For the time being, it's still a rather interesting little... yeah, that's interesting. They sort of fell back into position there, and they're going to allow the Orc Javelins to get a volley off. That's a really strange call, I have to say. Meanwhile, the Variag Cataracts do charge in. The Black Swans were sticking out just in front, however the pikes are also long enough to the point where you can see here the Variag Cataracts took quite a lot of damage there, so in the end I managed to find sort of the Goldilocks zone, as it were, just right between the protection of the Black Swan Renegades from the archers and the protection of the pikes from the cavalry. There's not a huge infantry force over here just yet, so for the time being this is all we're going to have to deal with. I've got my rangers hidden up here on the hills. I've got some Dole Amroth archers which are about to start firing on the units as they move forward. There's Balakith marksmen on the way up. I've got my 2 units of halberdiers and my Haven Guard blocking this way, so there's a lot of quality, but the one problem I do have is if any pikes come this way, I'll need to target them down with my archers. But while I have spread myself quite thin, I have at least given myself the opportunity to... I've got the right tools across the battlefield to deal with the situation should it arise, but if the attackers play their cards right, of course, that will become more and more difficult for me to accomplish. Lord Camal's got some Parathil champions in there. I'm also going to commit one of my Parathil champions in here because I noticed some Variag bowmen trying to work up the flank. So I am going to try and get into them to prevent them from doing so. Because the last thing we need is units overrunning our position already, because we've committed enough to this front line where we need to get some efficiency with it. Archers on high there, targeting down some of the elements of the Kandish force. And Variag bowmen continue to move, so they will retreat and I will chase them. Actually, I see an opportunity to try and get in behind the line, but of course Khand are going to be able to respond in kind to that as well. Got my Knights of the Silver Swan moving around, just angling for a position. We're also setting up a secondary defence there. While up on this hill still, trading back and forth with arrow fire just to give the perspective of the men on the lower ground here. Obviously it is quite a daunting prospect in many ways to see a hill like that, but the attackers, of course, what they want is it to just become a pit fight. If it becomes a fight of just pure blunt strength, the attackers do end up winning. So if they hesitation will be defeat for them, really. If they can move forward with a lot of force quickly, they can buckle lines, especially for Dole Amroth. Dole Amroth archers firing in as the attackers make their way up here. Obviously it'll be fruitless to try and attack Arthedain Shield Guard from the front with archers. I am shooting at the Balakith marksmen to give them something to think about, but of course as far as the skirmish fight goes, Umbar have got the beating of me there. The only advantage I really have is one of terrain. You can see the Naru Sentinels moving forward. This is the last thing I wanted to see over here, really, because I don't really have the pikes to spare to go toe-to-toe with them, and even if I did, they would still lose because of the quality of the Naru. Such is the way of things. There's also Balagaya pikemen on the way forward. The Balagaya pikes can at least be skirmished down reasonably easily. The heavy armour of the Naru is going to be a real problem, but the fight will begin over here, and to be fair, I mean, the Athalon Halberdiers, I should say, will be good against the Arthedain Shield Guard. The armour-piercing phalanx is what we want to see. I've also got my Haven Guard over here, so in terms of quality, I'm not going to allow myself to get bullied by this Umbar side force. And of course, with the Archer support as well, if need be, I've got Ranger support up there as well, so I mean, I can push the panic button if need be, but of course it will put them into the harm's way of the Balaketh. Well, down here you can see that this front line at this point from Lord Carmel is really starting to fall apart. There's not much more that we can commit. I think he's probably committed too much, actually. I think there was a time when no more should have been committed, and this unit of Athalon Man-at-Arms is unfortunately going to pay the price for that. But we can at least shoot them. You know, the Kandish force won't be able to move forward completely while these Dole Amroth men are still here. You can see that very, very quickly, actually, that unit of Perithal Champions I sent forward got swallowed whole by a combination of Variag warriors and, of course, Brotherhood of the Axe, which is a very nice unit to use, and another unit of Nurad Storm Guard. So, no rest for the weary from Dole Amroth's perspective here. Meanwhile, still, the slow burn that this fight is. Fornos Dorain defenders were butchered, really. Mordor then fell back, not wanting to advance further into the defensive clutches of stuff like Dunedain Rangers and Axemen of the Sarnak, which is why his trolls will get killed by them in droves. But yeah, so far, very much a waiting game over on this front, whereas down here, obviously, things have gotten very chaotic really very quickly. Meanwhile, the first engagement happening up this hill, so a nice joint phalanx of the Black Swan Renegades and the Dore Amroth pikes against just the Nurads. That'll be just fine, but obviously there is a limited amount of strength I have over here. I've got my second unit of Black Swan Renegades I can send forward as well, which I am going to do now, because I see that Brotherhood units are going to filter their way to the front line as well, so I need to have enough strength on this front line to hold for the time being. Dore Amroth archers here. I think they're just about out of ammunition. Indeed they are, so I've got them that I can send forward as cannon fodder as well if I need to. But I know with all of the strength that's coming across it, eventually I'm going to lose this choke point. It's just a case of pinning them in place for as long as possible and getting some damage done. Meanwhile, over here, I have sent my Wanderers of Nimrodel over because I see the threat that the Naru Sentinels are. I need to kill them off, because if I don't, then I'll get bullied over here. My Halberdiers will not be able to lay down their efficiency as much, and I do want them to, because against the Arthedain units, those Black Swan Renegades will be really good. You can see the Balagaya pikemen are already shaken because of the fire they've taken from the Dore Amroth archers I've got on the high ground. Balaketh marksmen are firing in, which of course you have to. When you see the Rangers, you have to fire into them, but damage is already being done, and over here things are actually going well. Over here I actually feel as though I can win with the archer support that I have. They're out of ammunition now though, so I'm going to transition them across to a melee fight. Got a unit of Athalon Halberdiers in reserve as well should I need them. And also with the Brotherhood units on the front line now, Brotherhood of the Axe, Balaketh marksmen that are out of ammunition, I commit my own Dore Amroth archers here just to hold the line a little bit longer. And that is a very nice front line indeed. Macemen in between the gaps that the pikes are affording them, and then the nomads pushing forward with their strength as well. Meanwhile, victory for Khand over in this first choke point, so now they will have to deal with the second. So I've set up a front line. There's some Halberdiers in there from Lord Cumnall, but both of my units of Athalon Men-at-Arms are going to be the thing that holds the line here. And of course we still have support from skirmishers, including some units from Gondor, which have made their way over here now. Veterans of Osgiliath, of course, will out-skirmish anything that the attackers have at their disposal. Even Balaketh marksmen, to be fair. The only reason I don't really mention them in the same way is because the Veterans of Osgiliath are, of course, more expensive. Pelargia Marines we've got back here as well, so good to see some Gondorian support. I've got another unit of pikes over here as well, some Dore Amroth archers. We have some more units in town over here as well, including the Haven Knights, of course, and more of Carmel's force. So it wasn't the entirety of Carmel's army, that it really was just a portion of it. Variag bowmen are firing in, skirmishing with the Tirithea marksmen and the Athalon men-at-arms. Some of them are pointing the wrong way, unfortunately. You can see there the nomadic marauders coming forward once again. Dore Amroth archers. I was actually firing into the Variags, but you can see one of the units of nomadic marauders came forward before and were immediately targeted down by a lot of archers, but this time Y2K is going to be able to get in here, and he is going to be able to fire a good volley of his javies in here, going after the halberdiers. So again, good choice of target. Meanwhile, up here still, there is an almost total lack of movement, but finally we're going to see Eclipse move in. Sauron's Will, and around on infantry moving in. The fact that there is a unit of Arthedain pikemen over here will mean that we as the defenders are fairly relaxed, at least initially, because that will give us the anchor that we need to our line to really keep holding this position. And of course, while Arthedain will be displeased that their skirmishes can't be used as easily, the same will go for Mordor on this occasion. And actually, with the position being what it is, the Wardens of the North would actually clean up in that position, as of course with the Rangers. Wardens of the North, meanwhile, are actually firing down here. I presume they're going after either Brotherhood units or Nurads. You can see over here, actually, these Brotherhood of the Spear are just going to get easily dealt with by the Fountain Guard, and obviously the remnants of that Storm Guard unit are also there. More units colliding with the frontline Nurad halberds now. Again, lots of armour piercing, which isn't going to be great for us, but Lord Kamul does have his Haven Knights in behind enemy lines at this point, which is good to see. My Doranonal archers are also going to get onto the front line because they're out of ammo now, so just to get in the way, because eventually, again, we're fighting a losing fight on many fronts now, really, because of all the armour piercing that we're dealing with as Dole Amroth, and we really don't respond too well to that. And I've actually moved my Nimrodel Rangers over here now, because this blob now represents a nicer target, and also my front line needs the support of it now, because we're Storm Guard as well, insult to injury. I actually got another unit of Doranonal archers over here to keep firing into this front line over here. Harbingers of Castamere made their way over here, but they took a few volleys from both regular archers and Rangers. So they arrived wounded to the front line, and now the Haven Guard are going to be able to pick up the pieces. And with 2 banks of halberdiers and a unit of out-of-ammunition archers, again acting as the cannon fodder. Again, feeling confident on this front line. The issue is going to be elsewhere. And there you can see this front line continues to hold. The pikes are really what's doing it for us, and the Rangers will be able to get a nice amount of kills there as well. Even though the DPS on them at this point is not quite sufficient to allow us to fully do the business. I'm not sure where the Haven Knights went. Did they go over here? No. Where did they go? Are they way back yonder? They are, in fact, going back to the units way over here at the back, going after the Alcarondas Legion. So a good pick, because they won't be able to defend themselves quite so easily. They may be melee cavalry, but the mass will still very much do the business on the charge. And Khand and Umbar continues to move forward. Not looking quite as healthy, these armies, as they used to, but remember that they do stretch right the way around to the other side of that hill, so it's not the full extent of their force. But then the same goes for us as well. Halberdiers and men-at-arms doing well on the front line here against the remnants of the Nurads and the Veriags. Javelins coming forward from both sides. My FALAS Marines are targeting down the front line. The Brotherhood of the Spear are on the front here, as well as the Nurads. We're fighting our hardest, but again, it's not going to be through outright melee might that we win this fight as Dole Amroth. We need to do it through other means. We need to get good skirmish positions, good angles, and of course we need to try and use our cavalry if we can, but it's difficult to break out still. Lord Kamul managed to do it with his unit of Haven Knights, but now of course it's easier said than done. Meanwhile, starting to see a fight on all fronts really throughout the choke points now as Mordor come forward. Got a combination of Around on infantry and Minas Morgul chosen going up against the weaker Fornost Arraign defenders. Again, the pikes over here are what's going to make it difficult for Mordor. But Mordor are now engaging. Arthedain, of course, defending from the front. And you can see over here that the armour piercing from the Sauron's Will serving them quite nicely on the front line. And actually there are dismounted Knights of Illuminus here, so it is interesting to see that. Fountain Guard, a lot of quality coming forward from us as the defenders. So we're dumping quite a lot into this defence, to be honest. As we can see over here on the cliffside as well, the Rangers shooting into the Temple Executioners as they move forward to try and support the Halberdiers and the Sauron's Will, who are going up against the unit of Axemen of the Sarnak and Arthedain pikemen. So a very interesting force there. Meanwhile, yeah, you can see over here at this point, the veterans of Osgiliath arriving just a little bit too late from Viper action to help this front line. The overall weight of the Brotherhood of the Axe and the Nurads and all of the armour piercing and pike support they were getting was too much, even with the archer support up on the hill. Trying to do as much damage to this blob as we can, it's definitely worthwhile going after. So the veterans of Osgiliath can still hold them in place for a little bit longer, and we can hopefully see them be efficient. You can see over here we are definitely going to win over on this side. The Umbar forces have stayed standing for quite a while, But I'm going to get cut off at this point, so basically what we're going to have to do is a backs to the wall job where I turn my halberds around and we just hold this choke point from the other side, essentially. So these units are obviously going to get cut off, but they can still go down fighting. As the Y2K sees this, and he knows that if he can charge into the back of those halberdiers, he could actually save those Umbar forces. Obviously I'm not going to allow that to happen. I'm going to transition some of my units to the other side, starting with the archers because they were at the back of the line. So they're going to stand in the way, which will buy us enough time to or buy me enough time to rejig my line and get a unit of halberdiers in the way, which will be very nice for us. Meanwhile, I've also got a unit of Arthedain in behind now. And they did charge into a unit of Brotherhood of the Axe over there, but now I'm going to try to get into the back of this line. Unfortunately, this is a slow charge. They didn't get their lances down, which is unfortunate. But it's going to be enough to sort of disrupt the line at least. And there were a few units that were already shaken on the front line, so with that cavalry support we are actually starting to do some decent things on this front line. Brotherhood of the Shadows are there. Going to move over here with my Arthedain now as I try to get into a position once again to do some damage with them. So this is obviously my most damaging unit of cavalry, so I need to make hay while the sun shines really and use them well. But there's a lot for me to focus on at this point because my army is so stretched at this stage. Very cataphracts are going to be charging in here to the Wanderers of Nimrodal. Actually, yeah, they did. They managed to tech that charge just in time. The lances came down this time, which is enough to break those nomadic marauders. Which is good. I do need to get out of there fairly quickly though, because obviously Nurad Stormguard are an absolute nightmare for the Arthedain. I am going to get them out of there, but they're going to go through the Stormguard, which is going to be painful. This is where the 2 hit points do come into play, however. FALAS Marines out of ammunition, so they're on the front line now, just trying to hold with what we can, because at this point this front line has actually become a fairly nice position for us to hold. We will eventually lose it. Arthedain are going to move over here, and I think we are... Yeah, so I see with the warlords on the way over here, I'm not going to engage them. They outnumber me mightily at this point. So I'm going to instead charge into the Brotherhood of the Axe and try and finish them off. And that will, of course, free up all of these Gondorians. Down come the Lancers. Yeah, and that's a nice charge. Even the Brotherhood units thinking about routing after that one. Not a huge amount of damage done, but... going to turn around, and at this point there's really nothing else to do other than charge into the warlords. That is a fight that is even really when both sides are at full strength, but the warlords have got more in their unit. I think I actually got slightly the better charge there, but it's not going to be enough. I think that's still going to be really mutually assured destruction. I've got my... well, actually that's Carmul moving his pikes across to stop the Veriag Cataphracts from ravaging the back line over here, which we're still holding on to be fair, making a real nuisance of ourselves. So I have turned them around at this point. My rangers at this stage are out of ammunition, as are... actually, I think that unit of archers still did have... no, that's the full unit. The very depleted unit of archers I've got over here does have a bit of ammo, I think, but at this point, there wasn't really... I had no... actually, no, they don't have ammunition, do they? No, yeah, it's the same unit, so yeah. None of my archers have got ammunition at this point. I thought they still did, but they do not. Haven Guard are going to finish off what's left of the Umbarim over there, while my out-of-ammo skirmishers and my halberdiers just hold on for as long as they can over on this side. Of course, they will eventually lose because of the pikes and the quality that they're dealing with. But even so, it's a good opportunity to thin out the herd, essentially, as it is continuously a fighting retreat. The Hwacha firing a volley in there, doing some damage to the Doranernal pikes. There are the Balakith marksmen. And you can see there, unfortunately, taking a few throwing knives to my Perithil champions, which I'm already falling back now to the final stand, essentially. There's the Hwacha crew, throwing knives, doing their thing. Yeah, my Arthedain have been killed. Ultimately, still 12 warlords of Umbar remain. I think I did actually charge back into the Brotherhood of the Axe as well, so I've got a few more kills on them with that, but enough disruption, enough routing caused to the point where it definitely wasn't a complete waste of my Arthedain. I would have liked to have done slightly more damage with them, and I would have done if the Lancers had come down on that charge, but unfortunately they didn't. I still have my 2 units of Knights of the Silver Swan as well, which I'm going to try and charge into the Balakith marksmen over here. Again though, not really, they didn't get their Lancers down, and in the end only 2 of those Balakith marksmen end up perishing, and of course that's going to get the attention of the Veriag Cataphracts. Meanwhile, over on this side of things, Everdim archers trying to rain death down from on high. The pikes and the Dunedain peacekeepers are still fighting with their backs to the wall somewhat. Minas Morgul Chosen and Morannon infantry over here wearing the Arthedain defensive lines down. What about up here? This is definitely a real brawl, which, I mean, Arthedain would have been winning for at least a time because of the quality. Actually, there's some Gondorians up here as well, the mighty Fountain Guard. But there are Temple Guard on the front line now, Orc Javelins that are out of ammo. I mean, to be fair, on the front line, I look at this and I still think that the Kingdoms of Men should be winning this fight, to be honest with you. But again, it's all about attrition. And Mordor will probably prioritise other ways. There's a few units from Umbar over here now as well. So Umbar have really stretched their support right across the map. They've been at both extremes of the fighting. And indeed, they are still over here. I mean, at this point, this assault ended in failure, but this assault over here will ultimately end in success. Because I simply don't have the manpower to withstand it anymore, really. The Haven Guard will continue to fight as hard as they possibly can, of course. But ultimately, on the end of pikes, it's not going to be enough. My Rangers are still fighting hard. Nurad Storm Guard are on the front line as well, so it's going to be tough. And over here now you can see that this front line has ultimately fallen apart. I'm trying to do some cycle charging with my Silver Swan Knights. There's still a few units over here that are ultimately routing off as well. So yeah, you can see that ultimately, though, those Knights of Silver Swan, they need to just get out of here at this point. Because Storm Guard, Halberdiers, enemy Knights, simply too much to bear. And finally, the resistance, at least largely, there's still that force in the hills over there, of course, but largely the frontline resistance of myself and Lord Camul as the Dole Amroth contingent of this defence has been broken. And that, of course, leaves the resistance in the hills, which Mordor are making slow but steady progress against as Arthedain and Gondor continue to plug the gaps, which, to be fair, considering Gondor's polearm focus and Arthedain's status really as one of the pike powerhouses in the game, at least in terms of numbers, you'd expect it to be fairly slow going for Mordor as the Pelagia Marines throw their payload in there. The Nazgul are in here as well, though, which is probably having an impact. I mean, the Evendim Archers are coming in just to try and help plug the gap, but that isn't going to be enough against the mighty Nazgul. Fatigue might be setting in as well, to be fair, because, of course, a lot of these Arthedain and Gondor units are fighting uphill. They will become exhausted much more easily. Blackguard of Barad-dûr on the front line as well now. The symbol of the Eye of Barad-dûr emblazoned on their shields again. A much improved unit model, I would suggest. I do very much like the darker colour scheme that they bring to the table. We've got over here Corsair Blackguards, Narun Aru Royal Guard as well. Yeah, Eclipse still has a decent amount in reserve as well, which is the problem. He's making slow progress, but he also has enough in reserve. You can see over here Gondor Spearmen finishing off the Temple Executioners, actually, so it was a very bloody battle down here. But ultimately, with the Balakath Axe Guard arriving, a fresh unit, you would imagine that to be enough to give the attackers the edge over here on the cliffside path. Scooting over to the other side, yeah, you can see at this point things turned pretty quickly. This unit of Doran Ernil archers trying to pull back. I think they must have still had at least a smidge of ammunition. And there goes Arthedain's general, that was, I believe, at the hands of the Temple Guard. Doran Ernil archers, yeah. So I was trying to pull them back to actually get their final volley off, but I wasn't obviously going to be able to do that. The Haven Guard will, of course, take a real beating. For a moment there, it still said victory seems certain for them, so they will still kill off a few more. And it is going to be a Pyrrhic victory, I would say, over here for Khand and Umbar, but a victory it is nonetheless. And the final resistance of the infantry, at least, of Dole Amroth will fall away, at least. Myself and Lord Camul will have retreated a couple of our units back here. I've got both my units of Knights of the Silver Swan, which I'm still making up my mind of how best to utilise them, and one unit of Perithal Champions. And Camul still has a unit of dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan and a very depleted unit of Tirithea Marksmen, albeit I don't think they are long for this world, because the very Cataphracts are on the way forward to charge into them. It's unfortunate because it looks like they still have a bit of ammunition. They're not going to be able to get away now, though. They might be able to... Well, they might not rout, at least, although that is a charge from Knights, yeah, so that is a nasty charge. Not completely all-conquering, but still worthwhile for the Cataphracts to engage in. There's also the Warlords of Umbar, so there's still enemy cavalry around, enemy cavalry of higher quality than mine. So that is a problem for me, even if I do manage to break out. I was thinking of charging in, but unfortunately my own units were really in the way of that charge, so it didn't really land as well as I would have wanted it to. Otherwise it probably would have wiped out a good portion of that Balakath Guard unit, but now with a combination of Wardens of the North and Axemen of Lasarnak, it doesn't really matter either way. This unit of Balakath Marksman, Balakath Axe Guard is going to fall away relatively quickly, either way you look at it. While up here, you can see Mordor pull back actually from this front line, so I think the Nazgul, did they retreat or did they die? That would be an interesting catch if they just perished there. I think they did actually, because they can't see them scurrying away off into the distance, so I guess they must have fallen. Olag Kai are up here ready to charge in. I mean, there's still some Fountain Guard on the front line, which will give the Olag Kai pause for thought. The Temple Guards still have a bit of ammunition actually, despite being involved in melee earlier. Some depleted Moranons are back here, as well as of course the Uruk Captains, Mordor's general unit today. So that's a unit of quality still there. Evendim Archers firing in. There's a lot of units up here which are pretty well protected from arrow fire, to be honest with you, so the amount of damage they actually do is debatable, but I mean it does at least cause the Olag Kai to feel as though they do need to get in here. I mean low damage pikes and spears are not going to be enough really to give the Olag Kai much pause, and they will be able to fill their boots really in terms of kills. And I think there's a routing unit from myself there, yeah, one Doranernal Archer running for the hills. The Haven Guard of course will not disgrace themselves, so they will fight to the bitter end. Yeah, I mean this is all they have left over here of their assault. I mean they sent off a couple of units I think, well it's actually only the very Cataphracts really, wasn't it? But some very depleted Nurad Footmen, some Nurad Storm Guard which is still reasonably healthy, and then some heavily depleted pikes as well. Very much a back-to-back fight there, or at least it was for a small time. So you can see over here what I'm going to do with my cavalry. I saw a pathway where no Mordor units were, because now they've committed themselves to the top of the hill pretty much entirely. I'm going to send them to the backfield over here where the attackers began. And I'm just going to bide my time and wait and see where best I can charge in, because if I can get a really nice rear charge, that will of course greatly help our efforts to win this battle. Up here on the high ground now it's a bit of a lost cause. Those Evendim Archers trying to do some damage to those Corsair Blackguards. Probably one of the better targets they could be going after, to be honest. So certainly nothing wrong with that. What else have we got going on here? So we can see here Olag's getting into the Evendim Archers. They of course will not do so well against trolls in melee. So good use of the Olag Kai here. They were used at the right time, so they weren't butchered by stuff like heavy axes or Fountain Guard. Pelagia Marines. Is this the Nazgul? Is this where they're at? They're fighting something. Well, there are still 10 Nazguls somewhere, so what are they doing? They're sort of parrying the invisible assailants. Who can tell? Anyway, more archers doing the business, firing into the Corsair Blackguards. Balakath Axe Guard are also over here. Variag Bowmen from the low ground are actually doing the same to the Axemen of Lasarnak, however, so axe to axe. Balakaths have got certainly a numbers advantage here. Interesting to see who would win that fight. I think it would be the Balakath Axe Guard, because they've got better melee defense. That's like their thing. The Axemen of Lasarnak have got significantly better armor, but of course this is an armor-piercing unit, so that doesn't really count for a whole lot. Interesting. But of course both sides really taking pot shots at one another. The Axemen of Lasarnak now, though, their support is really abandoning them, and they will fall by the wayside, unfortunately for them. So I was thinking about trying to charge into the rear, but of course the Narunari Sentinels do turn back. But to be honest with you, at this point, even if all my cavalry achieves is pulling units off the front line, it's still worth it, especially if it's a unit as strong in a grind fight as the Narunari Sentinels. And we don't want them on the front line, because they outclass anything we have in terms of pikes. Meanwhile, these poor Pelagia Marines, they tried to run away into the corner, but all they've succeeded in doing is trapping themselves in here with the Olag Kai. Not so fun for them. Meanwhile, there are still units over here, which actually at this point, after they look like they're going to win this fight, again it's a minor victory for us, but we'll take what victories we can, where we can, I think, at this stage in proceedings. Still a long way to go in this fight as it enters, really. The first phase, of course, was a battle of a really widespread battle across really the whole map, which is what you want to see. Lots of different areas being attacked, but now the second phase, we as the defenders need to consolidate. It's a pretty nasty looking position, of course, especially with veterans of Osgiliath that still have some ammo and marksmen of Andros. Gondor will be, again, like I said at the start of the battle, really the centre point of this defence now, because Arthedain have really taken a lot of losses in the hills. Dole Amroth, both Dole Amroth armies obviously took a lot of losses out on the out in the village and in the hills on the other side of the map. So lots of damage done to all. Still warlords of Umbar. The thing I can bring to the table, of course, is my cavalry. I can be an annoyance really in the backlines. I can't really do anything too substantial unless I get very lucky. Nice charge there from the very Cataphracts, doing some good damage there to the Gondor infantry. They do need to wear us down. Arthedain can offer some support in terms of some skirmishers, I think, anyway. Actually, no, doing down troll slayers, that's what they had left. So there, they've got some good javelins that they can utilise, as well as some high-quality infantry. Lord Camul still has some dismounted knights of Silver Swan. To be fair, I still have some Perithil champions, so I don't have nothing in terms of infantry. I can add myself to the front line, which we are going to set up here in this little gap. Some good opportunities for skirmishing, but good opportunities for the enemy to skirmish in as well. They've got this hill that they can utilise for any artillery they have left, and a nice hill there. Unfortunate for Lord Camul there as he takes a nice charge from the very Cataphracts. Not a huge amount of damage, of course. Knights to the Silver Swan. That second hit point saving them at least from the first charge, and that wasn't the best charge anyway. It didn't have quite the oomph that charges from Knights can have. They are engaged now by the Variag Bowmen though. They need to really get away from here, otherwise they are going to receive that second charge, and this one probably will be really, really nasty. Yeah, and that one will be. A few of those units, yeah, and you can see that this time the unit count does tumble in the way that we've become accustomed to when it comes to these heavily armoured knights, and this is the cue that Lord Camul needs to get these units out of there. In behind the relative safety of Arthedain pikemen, and especially the guards of Osgiliath, who have not seen combat yet, so they are still fresh. They can't really afford to go creeping forwards like this, but still. You can see over here actually I have my Knights of the Silver Swan. This is my general unit as well, and I can see that some of the units that were victorious against me in the hills are still transitioning across the field, so there's a good opportunity maybe to pick off a few. Ardenheim, Shield Guard and Nurad Footmen. The Footmen, of course, are the softer target, which is what I'm going after if they don't notice, but I do believe Mevin sees the cavalry coming, and yeah, he does. He gets his Ardenheim Shield Guard in the way, which of course is not ideal for me, but I can just sort of reposition my charge, and in the end that was actually a real mistake from me. I should have just followed through on that charge. Instead I retargeted to the Ardenheim Shield Guard, and in the end that sort of made my units not want to get their lances down. It is interesting as well, like someone did notice it, I think it was Eclipse actually who said this during the fight, that Dole Amroth's cavalry seems to have that happen to them a lot, like performance anxiety perhaps, where they just don't get their lances down, which is a real problem for Dole Amroth, considering that is pretty much their whole thing. I've got my other unit of Knights of the Silver Swan over here as well, just sort of getting up onto the hill, biding their time and waiting, getting ready for a nice downhill charge perhaps. If they get forgotten about, which is my great hope, that's when I can charge into perhaps some Corsair Blackguards. That would be a nice target, but lots of anti-knight, or not lots of anti-knight, lots of anti-cavalry units they could utilise against me, like pikes and their own cavalry, of course, which is far superior to mine at this stage in melee. I'm going to go in for another bite of the cherry at this point. The Ardenheim Shield Guard coming forward, getting a little bit too far away from any support, so now the lance has come down, and this should be complete devastation for this unit of Ardenheim Shield Guard. Heavy spearmen or no, there just aren't enough of them to withstand that charge, and that should be them dead to the last man, and indeed it is. That's what you want to see from a unit of heavy lancers. That's what they are capable of. I can charge onwards now. I thought that was a unit of Nurad Footmen on the field, and that's why I was charging towards them, but then I actually paid attention and realised they were Storm Guard, which that's, again, the unit I really don't want to tangle up in with my cavalry. Regardless, the cavalry is but a footnote, really, as we settle in for the main event, which is this fight, of course, on the front line. Gondor, the primary defender at this point, very much at home in this kind of situation. Yes, there's still quality from Umbar and Khand and Mordor, but all of them are depleted at this point. All of them have been bled at least a little bit throughout the battlefield. And this, of course, means that Gondor, using their pikes on the front line, using their heavy armour, they will be able to hold this front line as we sort of get into the guts of this front line. Guards of Osgiliath being the centrepiece, heavily armoured, rank and file Gondorian units acting as a bit of a buffer. There's also Wardens of the North from Lango moving in, and of course we do have plenty of units which we can use. Elsewhere, Narun Iroh Guard, however, really good in a skirmish fight. One of the very, very best because of that heavy Black Numenorian plate. They're firing in over here to the Veterans of Osgiliath, which actually means that even though the Troll Slayers were hiding, I think they do need to get out of there. The Rangers are firing into the front line, doing some good damage there to the Elka-Rondas Legion, which is good to see. I think, yeah, you can see my Knights of the Silver Swan just observing matters from the mountaintop. Dunedain Troll Slayer, so we still have a lot of good tools over here. The question is whether we can outlast the attackers, and whether the attackers can get into a good position to use their stuff against us. But this is, of course, where Gondor do feel very much at home. Arrows whistling overhead, a bit of friendly fire, but most of those missiles are finding their marks, going into the Storm Guard. Also, our Blackguards ready and waiting, ready to utilise those high damage javelins. There comes some Javies as well from the Pelagia Marines. Not quite as devastating as the Blackguards, but still a good position for them to use their javelins. Of course, once they're out of ammunition as well, they will make good cannon fodder. They can keep themselves alive decently enough. They're shielded. You can see now some Minas Morgul chosen trying to push through from the flank. And I see the Veterans of Osgiliath coming down through here. They could be out of ammo as well. So sort of a classic siege battle choke point to sort of end things off on, but you can see still a lot of units filtering their way through. More Storm Guard in the distance, more Brotherhood of the Axe. None of these units are fully healthy at this point, but there's still a lot of reinforcements that can be brought to bear, which is part of the reason why I'm sort of trying to give them something to think about with my cavalry, because if I can delay that transition to the front line, that will be very beneficial to our team. And even though my cavalry may not get the damage done that I would ideally like, it can still be useful. And of course, considering the fact I only have one infantry unit left to really help out with, that is something you can see over here as well. Lord Kavul has got one ranger left who had pretty much full ammo apparently. So over a really, really long period of time, he could actually do a lot of damage, but obviously it would take, you know, hundreds of thousands of frames for him to utilise all that ammunition really. So the battle will be decided one way or another, with or without him, but he's, you know, he's helping. He's doing his best. You can't ask for more than that. Still some Blackguards. There's still the Hwacha down here from Mr. Sneakmare. Still also the Hwacha from Y2K, so the artillery, the enemy artillery is still here. And of course we only saw a few volleys from them previously, so they could still have a decent chunk of ammo, which could be a real godsend for them. Unfortunately, however, based on the position taken up, they are very likely to get quite a lot of friendly fire, as well as damage done to the enemy. So that is worth bearing in mind as the fight continues. There are the Temple Guard, Arthedain Shadow Bow, so enemy rangers, depleted though they may be, they're firing into the top there against the Arthedain marksmen. I mean, as they're depleted like that, firing into the front line won't really get as much damage done, and it's like the perfect angle to shoot the Arthedain marksman, so it's better than doing nothing. I don't know whether that was friendly fire, but that coincided with a javelin volley from behind for the Kandish general. That might have been the Blackguards that ended up killing him, to be honest with you. Which is most unfortunate for him, as these Arthedain marksmen continue to take pot shots from the Arthedain shadow bows. More Javies coming forth from the Dunedain Troll Slayers. I'm moving in with my Parathor champions now. I see that there is maybe a slight gap appearing on that side of things, and Pelagia Marines are all well and good, but a bit of extra damage on the front line certainly won't hurt. It won't go amiss. Knights of the Silver Swan are over there. You can see the Parathor champions are moving in, so this is the last infantry unit I have to commit really, so I'm just going to commit them now, get them into the front line, see part of our line that's taking a little bit of damage, and we're going to get in there. Obviously a unit of heavy swordsmen, what Dole Amroth do best. The fear causing effect probably isn't going to come into play too much, I would imagine, but they are going to commit themselves in. And there you can see Corsair Blackguards also doing the same as I get onto the front line there, which is good. And you can see over there in the distance my Knights of the Silver Swan have come down, because I noticed that now is the time the attacker's attention is elsewhere, and you can see here a nice downhill opportunity to charge into the Olag High. They may be slightly depleted from their escapades earlier on, but they could still be a real concern for us later. The lances do come down as well, and I managed to skewer 3 of them there. And it's actually a little while before Eclipse even notices this. I do actually pull out and get back on top of the hill before he notices that something has gone amiss with his Olags. I will try to do that again, because if I can get away with that a second time, that would be glorious, but I don't really allow my cavalry time to get set, because I know that it's only a matter of time before Eclipse notices that something has gone wrong. So I do get a little bit ahead of myself, and the pathfinding obviously goes a little bit awry there. So instead I'm going to try and get away from the Olag High here, because of course in sustained melee, the Olag High will beat the brakes off my Knights of the Silver Swan. If I can get into position now. That was a nice pick out. You can also see over here my Knights are sort of getting over here, but in around halberds are just routing, so no worries there. I do charge in again, but this is where Eclipse notices. The lances do come down, but on this occasion, unfortunately, they sort of slip through the Knights of the Silver Swan because they were counter-charging, and as a result, they sort of get their vengeance, really, and kill off a few more of my Knights. But at the very least, it's worth doing. Because my Knights are not really going to accomplish much else, especially not with Variag Cataphracts on the way over and Brotherhood of the Axe. So now that I've attracted the attention of the Cataphracts, the element of surprise is gone. So I'm going to need to get them out of there. And you can see over here, Arthedain Shadow Bows still firing into the Arthedain Marksmen, and as time has worn on, they've definitely done a lot of good damage here. Again, the basis of this front line is the Gondorian men, with the Arthedain forces also helping them out. Pelagia Marines here. I've got my Parathor champions over on this side of the line. Probably the most high quality unit we've got on the front line at this point. You know, Guards of Osgiliath are probably around the same tier as they are, but yeah. That's all I have left, so they're committed now. There goes Mordor's general, actually, so a very nice kill there right in the centre of that line. Hard to tell what killed him. I think it was probably a Warden of the North, if I had to guess. Still some good damage being done by Lord Camal's archers as well, going after the Corsair Blackguards. So the front line holds, and we still have enough left. I mean, a lot of what we have left at this point is skirmishers that are out of ammunition, so that maybe is a little bit of a cause for concern. They still have stuff like Storm Guard, but it is Gondorian skirmishers that are out of ammo that is making up the basis of what we have left, which is good for us, because stuff like Marksmen of Caer Andros and Veterans of Osgiliath are just as valuable in melee, really, as they are at range. I've got my Knights of the Silver Swan still roaming around, so you can see I retreated this unit quite a long way. I think I actually did try to charge into the Variag Cataphracts, and it did not go well at all. You can see some of them ended up perishing up here, which is unfortunate. Again, I thought maybe if I could catch them off guard with a charge it would work out, but it didn't. Like, it's never worth really charging into Knights with a unit like that. Even if you've got a numbers advantage, it never really will pay off for you, because Knights are just so dominant in fights like that. Meanwhile, Uruk captains are very depleted at this stage. Variag Bowmen getting the business from those heavy swords of the Parathor champions and the Wardens of the North. There's still quite a lot of Alcarondas Legion though. This isn't going to be the be-all end-all of this front line by any means, but so far it has been an unyielding steel wall. This is a little bit of a concern, however, as we see a unit of very healthy, actually, Narun Aru Sentinels get onto the front line. This is something which will outclass any polearm we have, so we're going to need to use missiles on them, which is exactly what Viper Action is trying to do now. But even that, again, heavily armoured, they have a shield value which most pikes lack, so even that isn't going to be a guaranteed success. Still, the Hwacha bides its time. The Variag Cataphracts are there. Again, I'm sneaking my cavalry around. I'm just trying to be as annoying as I can with both my units of Silver Swan Knights. You can see my other unit, my general unit over there. Just giving them something to think about. Making sure they can't commit all of this stuff forward right now, because I think if they could, they probably would. Like stuff like the Brotherhood of the Sword, Blackguards, Narun Aru Royal Guard, all of this stuff really needs to be on the front line. Trying to break our resistance. Because the longer that we can keep those units off the front line, the more that Gondor is going to be able to assert itself as the full force of the enemy army is not going to be forthcoming. Another unit of Gondor infantry committing themselves to the front, buying us a little bit more time for our skirmishers. As Arthedain Shadow Bows, Viper Action has finally had enough of them. And given the fact that they're in a compromised position, those Andros marksmen are going to finish them off. Wanderer of Nimrodel still in position, slowly going about his business, as now are the depleted Arthedain marksmen firing down from on high, which is nice to see. 46 Brotherhood of the Axe making their way forward, so you can see at this point both armies very much made up of very depleted manpower counts. My Parathor champions at this point have taken a pretty hefty amount of damage on this front line. It was worthwhile at this point. It's just throwing in infantry to the meat grinder to keep the front line going for as long as possible. There is some Tirthair marksmen. Arrows coming in. So this is the advantage we have. We still have a few units of archers which are still going to be able to chip away at the assault. I mean, in terms of outright quality, the attacking infantry outstrips ours, I think. Again, look, Gondor infantry, ones of the White Tower are all well and good, but yeah. We were feeling fairly confident at this point in the battle as the defenders, because we have the tools. If they go all in, which is what they would need to do really to break our resistance on the front line, I could use my cavalry to its fullest. And one nice rear charge to the front line would be terminal at this point. See there, the very cataphracts just waiting as I pull back, keeping them off the front line. I mean, to be fair, this cavalry at this point isn't too useful for doing anything else other than sort of keeping my cavalry away. So I mean, to be brutally honest, I'm the one that at this point is being kept out. I'm buzzing around hoping for an opportunity to get a juicy rear charge in there, because that would well and truly decide this battle once and for all. Defeat seems certain on the front line for the attackers at this stage. Those fire arrows having the desired effect from Lango. Of course, our blackguards are there. The very cataphracts were coming forward to sort of... Again, I've got 48 cavalry units. You might think, why not charge into the 16 Varia cataphracts? Wouldn't go very well. Knights are so dominant in a fight like that. My Arthedain did okay against the Warlords of Umbar, but they are knights themselves. Knights of the Silver Swan, not so much. The lack of a second hit point and the lack of an anti-cavalry bonus makes a humongous difference to units fighting on horseback, as well as the charge bonuses. The Knights have got a better charge bonus than the Knights of the Silver Swan, is worth saying. Meanwhile, here on the front line, the Fountain Guard have been added. The last unit of genuine quality, as well as the Wardens of the White Towers. This is pretty much all in for us at this point. There's still a few units back there. Some marksmen of Andros, some Arthedain and marksmen as well. I actually do charge into the Olag High once again, kill off a couple more of them. All too happy to see that be the case. I need to get away from the Warlords of Umbar though, who do actually manage to get a... I think that charge actually missed, fortunately for me, otherwise I would have taken some losses from the back there. More Olag High fall beneath the lances of my Silver Swans, which is gratifying to see. I don't think the Olag High would achieve too much on the front line now anyway, to be honest with you. Now that the Fountain Guard are there, going in there would be certain death for them. And you can see the attacks are just running out of steam at this point, so more and more it's looking like this is going to be a defensive victory, which is good for us. Although, there is still that artillery. Very cataphracts are once again coming over here. The dance continues between them and the Silver Swan Knights as I sort of continue to move away. What I want to do actually is draw these cataphracts away far enough that my healthier unit can come in here and do some business. I'm going to try and get into a good set position to charge. These units over here are incredibly depleted. Those Bella guys are wavering after all, so not too much of a concern there. Blackguards getting into position. Wardens of Minas Ithil, very depleted though. 26 of them remain. But yeah, at this point they just don't have enough left to feed this front line, the attackers, which is a real problem for them. The lances come down, going into the pikes, and that will of course just evaporate them. Feeding on scraps really my cavalry at this point, but they may as well. Gives the attackers something else to think about other than being ground to death by Gondor on this front line. Very much in their natural habitat here, the Gondorians. More units coming forward. Brotherhood of the Sword. I mean, at this point, like, they have been getting picked apart by archers, but there's nothing really you can do at this stage. I mean, the attackers just really don't have the manpower left to break this front line, and even if they did, to be honest, the amount of skirmishes we still have is a real concern for them, so the battle is pretty much won at this point. But close, within 6%. already 90% of our armies have been destroyed. You can see over here, I think I did take that charge this time. I was like, you know what, let's do it. Feeling confident, but only one cataphract fell, 2 in the end. But look at how many Silver Swan Knights fell. Just by touching the cataphracts, it seems they perished. But yeah, a lot of death there. That's why you just can't really take a fight like that. Because Lancers are so poor at dealing with cavalry in melee, and Knights, of course, have got so many bonuses that it's really bad. The Watcher is firing away. Bit of friendly fire there. Grilling their own general. But both units of enemy cavalry have now been drawn off. This gives my Knights of the Silver Swan the opportunity, my depleted unit anyway, to come in. I guess they're both depleted now, but the unit that was depleted previously. The Watcher is firing away, getting a volley off, but getting just as much friendly fire as damage done to the enemy. And I do manage to charge in there to the Corsair Blackguards, doing a decent amount of damage there. I was going to pull through actually, but I noticed that the Naru and Aru Sentinels were really in behind here, so there wasn't really any point. But to be honest with you, I mean, at this point the attackers have got so little on the front line, so little, and yet the Watcher continues to hit mostly its own men. But I mean, it's worth going after. I mean, at this point, one last throw of the dice, try and fire the Watcher into that blob. Naru and Aru Guard, which again have been off the front line for too long, I think. If they were guarding against my Knights of the Silver Swan, I mean, yes, it's worth doing, but really they should have, if they compacted themselves a little bit more, the attackers, my cavalry wouldn't really have been a problem. They could have used a single unit as well as their 2 units of cavalry to zone them out, but they were wide enough spread that I could actually use my cavalry to pull them around a little bit and be annoying. And that, of course, was just one little bit of help that allowed Gondor, with all their skirmishers, to do their thing here in the front line, which is a very simple way, but in the end that's what really won the fight. Gondor's just very good in this situation. Little bit of support coming forth as well from Arthedain and our 2 Dole Amroth armies, and I do actually manage to get in behind, get my hands into the cookie jar again, so to speak. Another charge into the Corsair Blackguards with my Silver Swan Knights. The enemy cavalry still running around, and this time I do finally manage to get something of a rear charge, but I mean the battle has already been decided at this point, so there's no real need to concern ourselves. I'm just going to leave my cavalry there at this point. More AP arrows finding their marks, the Naru and Aru Guard falling in droves to the depleted Wardens of Minas Ithil. Actually, are they depleted? No, they're healthy. There was another unit that was depleted up there. It must have been the Marksman. Still my Knights of the Silver Swan are shaken, but they're in and amongst things, helping out the Troll Slayers, who will of course be able to absolutely butcher Naru and Aru on the front line. The enemy cavalry coming in, but at this point it's all done. Another charge coming in from the Knights of the Silver Swan. Again, another very small unit of Ardenheim Shield Guard gets evaporated by a charge. And then they're just going to nudge their way in. No need for a charge at this point. Victory is all but assured at this stage. It's just how much resistance the attackers want to put up before they do inevitably fall. Cataphracts are in here, getting absolutely dunked on, really, by the Wardens of Minas Ithil. Really, really nice damage there. Here comes another charge, this time feasting upon the Watcher crew. I see an opportunity to pad my own kill count a little bit with some soft targets. Nearly all of them fell. That Watcher crew though, I mean, it tried its best. It tried to shoot in there, but in the end, friendly fire, not enough ammunition left to really turn the tide. But close nonetheless, it's going to be within 7%, so we still have a decent chunk of our units left, but in the end it was really by the strength of Gondor in that choke point that we were able to carry the day, as well as the skirmishers. Arthedain still had a few skirmishers left. Myself and Lord Cumall only had a limited impact in the late game, I would say. My cavalry was all well and good, but it was more of an annoyance than anything else. I don't know how the attackers would feel about the cavalry being sort of decisive or not, because in my opinion all it really was just there to make our lives slightly easier on the front line by pulling away some units. Any charges I got were really a bonus, so killing off those few Olag High, the Blackguards, those very depleted units, that was nice, but it wasn't the reason we won this fight by any means. In the end it was by Gondor's strength on the front and just the fact that we had more skirmishers left at our disposal. And it could be said, actually, that early on, myself and Lord Camul certainly were under a lot of fire from those Variag bowmen, nomadic marauders. We took a lot of damage from ranged units. Arthedain, again, kind of as well. The attackers maybe should have saved more of their skirmishers for later. It would have made life maybe a little bit more awkward dealing with myself and Lord Camul, but I never felt as though I lost because of that skirmish fire into my lines anyway. I lost because of the high amount of armour piercing that Kand brought to bear, as well as that Umbar quality backing them up. And Lord Camul died because sheer weight of force on the front line over a larger period, or larger area I should say. A longer line. That was really the reason, not the skirmishers so much. If they had a few more Variag bowmen here in the late game, that would have been good to skirmish. They could have taken their time a little bit more with it. That probably would have been the way. But it was a tough battle for the attackers in the end when it got to this point, because if you allow Gondor to dig themselves into this place, which it's not so much a matter of allowing Gondor to, it's what we as the defenders decided to do. Viper action getting into a very nice choke point here, and in the end, that was a difference maker. And this is the last stand of this one remaining Storm Guard. You can see one of the Silver Swan riders there, but most of what is facing off against him is sword and board Gondor infantry, which is going to take its time killing this guy, to be honest with you. Even Wards of the White Tower are not the most damaging unit. They can rack up a good kill count over time, but their main attribute is, of course, how tanky they are. As the sword blows come raining in, as well as the rider who's just nudging into him, probably taking up valuable space, to be honest with you, that could be utilised by another infantry unit. But such is the way of things. There's a bit of distortion when you see units on a hill in Medieval 2, especially cavalry units, I've noticed. It's kind of strange. It's a bit of sprite distortion. That's going to show how tanky the Nurad Storm Guard really are. Definitely a frightening unit for all four factions that were on the defence today to face in melee. The Storm Guard is so effective against all of them. And that was certainly the case again today. Not enough to give the attackers victory. And he does actually manage to get another kill before he falls. I've actually still got Perithal champions alive. Only 3 of them, but still, there they are. So it's not just my cavalry that's left alive at the end. Myself and Lord Camul, I think, have got the least on the field. Maybe Arthedain as well, to be fair. They've only got Dunedain Troll Slayers left, I think. Gondor by far the most numerous, and there he goes. Victory for the defenders. And yes, 7% the difference in the end, so a nice close one. And we can't actually see the names, but I can tell you that I was the one who got the 3,000 kills. Which is nice, but in the end I think most of it was just because of some good positions that I was able to sort of lead my units to sort of stand and fight in. So yeah, as for over here, I can't actually recall who got the most kills out of these two. I'd assume it was... Actually, I really don't know who would have got the most kills. I guess it doesn't really matter. That's a close enough difference that it doesn't really matter. Mevon's Umbar army got the least amount of kills, which is interesting. I feel as though one thing that did happen was my most successful front line was the fight against Umbar with my Halberdiers and my Haven Guard. I don't think he committed quite enough over there for that to be a successful front line. Having said that, it's probably a good thing he did, because if he didn't, the fight up the hill that Kand managed to break through over to that hill there, basically, if he didn't go around the back and ultimately end up getting dumpstered by my Halberdiers, then I would have had those Halberdiers on the front line over there, and we probably would have held, especially with Ranger support. So it's probably for the best that he did take that fight, to be honest with you, even though from his perspective it probably wasn't that successful. Mordor and Arthedain had a very slow and methodical fight through the mountains, which ultimately Mordor did come out on top of, but Arthedain also fell back quite a lot of their forces for the last stand. So if Lango had committed everything forward, I don't know how that result would have gone. Probably still in Mordor's favour, because they have obviously slightly the stronger armies when it's a 4v4 siege on the attack, but still. And then the Kandish players obviously using their AP to good effect. Watchers were kind of a presence, maybe not quite as devastating as they could have been, but they were still there. But yeah, the Nurads today were definitely a real problem for us as the defenders. Mordor with the most kills though, which is interesting indeed. Almost the most kills out of everyone on the field, which is very interesting indeed. Still then, let's see what did the damage for the Dole Amroth army. So yeah, this was my army. You can see Haven Guard getting 320 kills absolute monsters on the front line. I think that does go to show, really, that armour piercing is not the be-all and end-all when you're going up against stuff like that. Like, obviously, I was going up against mainly sort of the higher-end Black Númenórean units with the Haven Guard, so most of those kills were of the highest quality as well. They did have the backup from the Halberdiers, which is important, but still very impressive from them on the front line. If you have a high enough base damage and a high enough melee defense to keep yourselves alive against stuff like the Naruna Aru and the Arthedain, then the Haven Guard will do the business. Armour piercing is not the be-all and end-all, like I said. My cavalry, again, limited amounts of kills, more of an annoyance in the late game than anything else. The Arthedain got some good kills on the Brotherhood of the Axe and onto the front line that was near the hill. The Knights of the Silver Swan, I mean, to be fair, a lot of those kills were on decent stuff, like Corsair Blackguards, Olag High, but again, it was more positionally that they were being used. But, you know, I'm not really that good at using cavalry most of the time, so I was actually quite okay with how it went this time around. Perithil Champions doing pretty well on the front line. This unit of 136 was the one in the late game that was on there, because this unit that only got 53, of course, was committed and then very quickly canned, really brought the hammer down on that front line. Wanderers of Nimrodel getting the most amount of kills on my army, obviously Rangers, 418. In a good position to take advantage of the Umbar and the Kandish assault. It wasn't enough to win that fight over there, but even so, you can tell really that even though the Rangers, yeah, I mean, Rangers are always going to get high amounts of kills in a defensive siege like this, and this was no different. Doranonal Archers doing decently among themselves. Black Swan Renegades holding the front line nicely against overwhelming force. FALAS Marines got good kills actually with those Javies. The Doranonal Archers getting over 200 kills, and then even my men-at-arms and Halberdiers especially obviously really helping out against those Black Númenóreans, which was very nice to see. As for Lord Camul, his dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan, you know, not so much, but one of them was only committed very late on. 202 kills on those Haven Knights, so his cavalry, they got into the back lines over there, of course, and started causing some havoc, and the attackers at that stage weren't as well prepared to deal with cavalry, so he got some huge value off them. Tirithea Lancers far less so, but they were just there to sort of worry the enemy skirmishers. 424 kills on his Rangers as well, so very, very similar to mine, really, in that regard. Really propping up our kill counts quite nicely. And the rest of his army, to be fair, a lot of his regular units didn't do quite so well, but then they had to take on the brunt of the initial Kandish and Umbar assault on the in the villages, on the flatter terrain, as it were. Halberdiers did quite well as well, though, and the Black Swan Renegades. Obviously, we can't see the what did the damage for Gondor and Arthedain, but I would imagine for both, to be fair, it would probably be their skirmishes, especially from the late game. So yeah, a very fun battle to be a part of. Big thank you to Eclipse for inviting me to it. For once, I was actually able to make it as well, which is nice, and I should be able to do so a little bit more in the future, hopefully, because I know, like I said, Eclipse has had a few issues with players just bailing on him in the past, which sucks. But yeah, regardless of that, hopefully these will continue, because I think this is definitely a little bit more interesting as far as TOL FALAS goes, because it gives it a little bit more variety. We've seen TOL FALAS work out in the same way too often now for me to sort of keep referring to it as this map that can work out in different ways, because at this point the meta has been established for regular TOL FALAS, and it really can't, I guess. But with this, of course, it changes it up significantly. Not only over here, but over on the other side with that pathway that leads through the hills where we saw quite a lot of fighting. It means that that hill over there takes on a whole different dynamic. So hopefully, more settlements like this that we've seen work out in the same way over and over can be changed. I think Bursa Gath is probably one of those which is sort of ready for that, so to speak. I actually have got a replay on Sagath, which I am going to utilise, but that is going to be, again, that replay will only see the light of day over a month away from now, but it will still be seen. But yeah, another fine one from Eclipse. So big thank you to Eclipse for making this. Big thank you to all of the players for making this battle what it was. And actually this one is, unlike a lot of the replays I've been doing recently, this one will actually see the light of day not too far away from now, probably a couple of weeks from the time of recording. Unlike most of the replays I'm doing at the moment, which will be sort of a month plus away, because I've obviously managed to build up quite a nice catalogue just in preparation for any uni stuff that may get in the way of future weeks of recording. But yeah, I'm sure the channel update, actually no, based on this video, the channel update may not be out by this point, but there is a channel update on the way. Once I know what's happening fully, I will be able to relay that to you, and we can move forward from there. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I certainly enjoyed playing in it, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.